I was born into a family so poor that even amidst the hardships that surrounded our community, our situation felt like a punishment. The nights were the worst, the emptiness in my stomach burned, and the physical pain mixed with despair, making me cry. But despite this, there was something inside me that would not conform. I wanted more than that. I did not want to be known only as the son of the can collectors. So when I heard about the possibility of a pact with the devil, the idea, surreal as it was, seemed appealing to me. But like anyone who considers such a path, I was faced with the question, how to begin? After searching for answers, I followed a path that seemed like a scene from a movie, somewhat illogical, but it was what I had. I went to the cemetery on a moonless night and drew a pentagram on the ground, following every detail of the instructions I had found. I called out to him 3 times, my voice almost choking in the cold air. Just as I was about to call out for the 4th time, a laugh froze my blood. Before me, a man appeared. He had an impressive physique, curly hair falling over his shoulders and tanned skin that seemed to reflect the darkness around him. But what really left me speechless were his eyes, blue and piercing, almost hypnotizing. Not knowing what to say, I asked if he was really the devil. He just smiled and confirmed it. In response to my ritual, he gave me a red ribbon, saying that the pact would be sealed soon. Still in shock, I tied the ribbon to my wrist, not sure if it was real or an illusion. The next day, a black car stopped in front of the shack where I lived. A silent driver simply signaled for me to get in. His expression was cold, almost frightening. During the journey, which seemed to last forever, he stopped at a gas station, pulled a bag from the passenger seat, and ordered me to change in the bathroom. Inside, I took off my dirty clothes and put on an impeccable black tuxedo, something I would never have imagined wearing. The journey continued to the country's capital, where we arrived at a discreet but elegant building. Upon entering a well-decorated room, I met the man from the cemetery again, now dressed in an elegant suit. He looked at me and asked what I wanted in exchange for the pact. I told him that I wanted wealth and influence, but not to become a public figure. I had always hated the spotlight. He agreed. But first he told me that I would have to renounce any belief in a divine being and accept him as the only one I would serve. For me, this was not a problem. Religion had never been a part of my life, and where was God when I cried out for hunger? I signed the contract, which described exactly what I would receive and the support I would have, like a family willing to help me with whatever I needed. To seal the pact, he demanded a kiss. It was not easy, since I am heterosexual, but if a simple kiss would give me a fortune, do you think I hesitated? Soon after that, my life changed drastically. I opened a bank account, and to my surprise, I saw the absurd amount of money deposited. Furthermore, I obtained a position of influence in my city, where I remained for 2 terms. To this day, I maintain a certain political relevance, but always discreetly, exactly as I wanted. At events and parties, devil worship was the main focus. These celebrations, which some would consider controversial, never involved anything illegal. They were not bloody rituals or orgies like in the stories in movies. They were meetings where our loyalty and our achievements were discussed. Contrary to what many people think, when you sign the contract, it is clear that breaking it will lead to death. We are not forbidden from entering churches, but our devotion to our Lord is absolute. There are no heroes who defy this rule and come away unscathed. The system is closed and ruthless. Some people believe they can get around the pact or return to a life of faith. But once you renounce your belief, it is almost impossible to return. To this day, I have not witnessed any sacrifices or acts of violence, just intense devotion and some freedoms that to many may seem immoral. If you are expecting a horror story full of atrocities, you may be disappointed. Real life is grayer, less epic. I know that in the end, I will go to hell. Yes, that scares me, but I do not regret it. I was able to take care of the people I love and offer them a dignified life. Almost 3 decades have passed since the pact, and nothing has ever been asked of me that I could not do. If my story sounds like fiction to you, I understand. I have been told that it sounds like a novel. but I swear it is the pure truth. If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel for more content like this and share it with your friends. Many more chilling stories are to come. This story happened to my mother when she was still a young girl. At that time, she was determined to get a job that would help her achieve her dream of going to college, since my grandmother and grandfather couldn't afford it. So she needed to find a job that not only paid well, but also allowed her to pay for her studies on her own. Luckily, she got a job as a janitor at a religious community center. The pay was good, enough to cover the expenses of the nursing school she wanted to attend, and even had some left over. The best part was the flexible hours. She could start in the middle of the morning and go home by early afternoon. But there was one peculiar detail. This center was known for intense religious practices, although I prefer not to reveal its exact name. According to my mother, some very strange things happened there. The pastor, for example, was famous for promising miracles to the faithful, but in a somewhat questionable way. He charged for the blessings. After payment, some workers were called in to prepare rituals that supposedly made these miracles possible. You may be wondering how my mother found out about all this. Well, over time she began to notice strange things happening around her. Since she was responsible for cleaning, she often came across evidence of what went on behind the scenes of these rituals. Initially, the rituals seemed to involve only animals, and my mother would often find and dispose of the remains of these sacrifices, as instructed by the pastor and the administration. Although it was something unusual, she continued her work, trying to ignore these details. Until one day she witnessed something much more sinister. She was cleaning an area when she heard strange voices and noises. It was as if she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. At that moment, she believes that the pastor had forgotten about her presence and ended up receiving a very peculiar visitor. An elegant man, wearing designer clothes and with an air of wealth that was reflected in details such as an expensive watch and shoes. My mother overheard part of the conversation and realized that the man's wife was seriously ill and he wanted help to cure her. During the conversation, the visitor handed the pastor a suitcase, which upon opening revealed a substantial amount of money. When she witnessed this scene, my mother suspected that something was deeply wrong and quietly walked away, feeling that this was not a normal situation. A week later, she was on her way to college when she realized that she had forgotten an important paper, so she called my grandmother, but the paper was not at home. It was then that she remembered that she had left the material at the religious center. Using her key, she went back to get it. She entered through the back, avoiding the main door, but as she entered, she heard a disturbing sound, like a moaning. The room was dark, and the sound grew closer and closer. As she approached the room where the rituals were taking place, she heard voices. Unnoticed, she looked inside and saw a terrifying scene. A woman was tied up and surrounded by candles, while the elegant man she had seen earlier was kneeling beside her. Next to him was another woman whom my mother assumed was his wife, given her frail appearance and obvious signs of intensive treatment, such as her hair loss. At that moment, my mother witnessed something horrific. The group cut the tied woman's neck, and she did not die immediately. They seemed to have planned it in order to prolong her suffering. Then they began to collect the victim's blood in a bowl. My mother was completely paralyzed by what she saw. After collecting a good amount of blood, they gave the container to the man's wife, who drank the contents. My mother describes that there was a significant amount of blood, possibly almost a liter. After this, the man's wife lay down on top of the victim's body. They undressed her, including removing the scarf that covered her head. The ceremony continued, with the group uttering words that my mother could not understand. There were 5 people in the room, and in a state of shock, she knew she had to get out of there. Before leaving, she stopped by the room where she had left her work and picked up her materials, heading to college. If you think that was the end of things, You're wrong. After processing everything she had witnessed, my mother decided that she had to leave that job. When she told the pastor she was leaving, he insisted that she stay, offering her a raise. Even though she was scared, she was afraid that if she refused, he might suspect something, so she reluctantly accepted the offer. Things, however, only got worse. On a normal day at work, she found a strange folder and, feeling a strong intuition, decided to look at the contents. Oh, when she opened it, she saw a photo of herself pinned to a sheet of paper taken from a distance while she was working. On the sheet were her complete personal information, blood type, date and time of birth, among other information that she had never provided. To this day, she believes that this information may have been obtained through the agreement she had at the time with a hospital, but she never knew for sure. This event left my mother extremely frightened. She began to believe that the raise offered by the pastor when she said she was going to leave had nothing to do with the good work she was doing, but rather with another intention. The next day, my mother packed a small suitcase and told my grandparents everything that was happening. She then decided to go live with her great-grandmother in a city in the countryside. With the support of her family, she managed to finish college and remained living in that city where we live to this day. And that is why I called this story a narrow escape, because if she had not forgotten about her work at the church that day, she might not have realized what was really going on there. She herself admits that because she was so naive at the time, if the pastor had said something, she probably would have believed it. But luckily, she witnessed the truth and was able to get out of that situation before it was too late.
My name is Carla, and I want to share with you the day I got out of a real trap. It all started when I decided it was time to try a new relationship. I had gone through a difficult breakup a few months before, and thinking it was time to move on, I decided to try dating sites. I won't go into details about the specific site, but I started using it casually to meet new people. After a while, I met a man who really caught my attention. He was incredibly handsome, had the same taste in music as me, and on top of everything else, he was the same age. The chemistry was immediate, and we soon arranged to meet in person. He seemed perfect, and I felt completely enchanted. Less than 2 months after our first date, he asked me to be his girlfriend, and I, blinded by love, accepted without thinking twice. I was extremely happy, but, as they say, poor people's happiness doesn't last long. Shortly after we started dating, he suggested I move in with him. Excited and in love, I accepted the invitation. It was when we lived together that things started to change. I noticed that he attended a kind of group that he called a congregation, but he never talked about it much. Every Tuesday and Friday he had meetings with this congregation, but he always made up an excuse when I asked if I could go with him. He claimed that I wasn't ready yet, so I ended up letting it go. I believed that it was just a personal activity of his and didn't pay much attention to it, until he started coming back from these meetings bringing bottles of strange liquids with dark colors and peculiar smells. He insisted that I drink them, saying that they were purification drinks that kept my energy high. He explained to me that it was like holy water, but with stronger properties. Even though I found it strange, I ended up drinking it a few times, believing that he was just trying to protect me from something. Over time, he also started bringing raw meat, saying that it was part of a tradition. Although it seemed completely strange to me, I ate them, without really understanding why I did it. To this day, I wonder if those liquids had some substance that made me suggestible, because I can't imagine why I kept eating those things. After a few weeks, I started to notice changes in myself. I felt isolated, distancing myself from my family and friends. In addition, I started to have very strange dreams about my grandmother, who had passed away years ago. She would appear warning me to leave that house and stay away from him, saying that I was in danger. After these dreams, I began to be more suspicious of his behavior and decided to pretend that I was still drinking and eating the things he brought, even though I was already apprehensive. After a while, he began to notice that I was pretending and started demanding that I drink the liquids and eat the meats in front of him. My discomfort grew, and I felt that something very wrong was happening. I decided to investigate more about this congregation that he attended. One night, while he was sleeping, I accessed his computer and ended up finding an unknown email, which, luckily, was logged in. Curious, I decided to take a look. Inside the email, I found an exchange of messages that left me in shock. He was talking to someone else, and in one of the messages, he stated that I was almost ready for the sacrificial ritual. There was even a set date for it. Completely terrified, I ran to check the calendar and realized that he planned to perform this ritual in less than 2 weeks. It was at that moment that everything became clear. Those liquids and meats were part of a process to prepare me. Without thinking twice, I packed a small bag with the essentials and left the house without making a sound. I walked to the nearest station and from there took a bus straight to my parents' house. I arrived there in a panic and knocked on the door in the early hours of the morning. My mother opened the door in fright, and as soon as she let me in, I told him every detail of what I had discovered and what had been happening. After calming down, I blocked him on all social networks and deleted my profile from the dating site. I never had contact with him again. Thank God I managed to escape that trap. Since then, I have learned that it is better to be alone than in bad company.